Okay, next we're going to have Lustre Releases. Today the part of Peter Jones will be played by Chris Morrone. Chris works for Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. He is dogged and relentless in his pursuit of bettering Lustre. He didn't give a bio, so I'm fresh out. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Morrone.
Hello. So I also lead the Community Development Working Group inside of OpenSFS. One of our primary goals is to make sure that all of the many organizations that are all contributing to Lustre development these days are all talking to each other and coordinating their efforts. The Lustre software is very complex. If we're all off working on our own favorite feature, there's not a lot of possibility that all those features are going to magically work together when we all put them together in the same tree. So within the working group, that's how we coordinate. We make sure we're all talking to each other. Within the pie chart that you saw earlier in Galen's talk, you saw the tree support. That was a rather large part of the pie there. We oversee that within the Community Development Working Group. When you see tree support, you might not know what that is. That is essentially another form of software development. You see the Lustre development part of the pie, that's easy to understand. That's all of the big features. Things like D&E, distributed namespace, those are things, big features that show up on the roadmap that everyone understands. But there's a lot of software engineering that goes into developing Lustre that doesn't appear there. You need a very large team of software developers that do nothing but review patches that come in. Because as much as we all like to believe that we're perfect software developers, the first time we develop a patch, there's usually a lot that could be improved. So the code reviewers are an extremely important part of the process, and the money there in the tree support contract, a large part of that goes to partially support those efforts. We also get together, we plan the major releases that Lustre is going to have. We coordinate between the different groups and get them to decide where we can land the individual features. And another big part of the pie is figuring out how to test all of this, because Lustre is complex and it's hard to find the testing resources at just one organization to do all the testing that we need to do. We need to coordinate and exchange that information amongst ourselves so we can figure out where to put our efforts in developing. This is just a preview. I'm going to show this slide a couple times throughout the talk. The first thing I want to draw your attention to and answer the question about, because I get this question a lot, what about version X? I know a lot of people out there, and from the survey I'll talk about later, I know there's a lot of people running 1.8, running Lustre 2.1 right now, but we're not going to really discuss that right now, because our position is that we need to focus on the current maintenance release, we need to focus on where we're going in the future, and if you need support for those older versions of Lustre, you should go and talk to your favorite Lustre support vendor. We've got another room here at LUG where there's a number of vendors. Go ask them what they can offer, because they're perfectly happy to help you out. So the most recent release that we worked on, put out, was Lustre version 2.5. Originally, if you remember back from previous LUGs, our plan had been to make Lustre 2.4 the major new long-term supported release of Lustre. It developed, through conversations we found that HSM was a killer feature that within certain circles just had to be there. People really wanted HSM. So with HSM appearing in Lustre 2.5, the community made the decision that we were going to transition, instead of 2.4 being the long-term supported release, we make it Lustre 2.5. Later on, we did learn that that caused some people some heartburn. And I think that tells us that we need to get more input from people. We'd like to see more activity from more of our user base, so we understand when we make these decisions the effect it has on everyone. In our discussions, we had people very much in favor of it, and everyone else was okay with it. So we had no opposing voices at the time. But that's something we can learn from. So we put out Lustre version 2.5 that was released on October 30th of last year. Like I said, this is going to start the new branch. This is the version that for the next 18 months or so, we're going to be putting out stable maintenance releases on. And of course, HSM. It's great to have that in. That's a major new feature that a lot of people are looking forward to. In Lustre 2.5, and I apologize, if you're a fan of pie charts from previous years, I did go with bar charts this year. I hope that's okay. So we had around 15 organizations that contributed patches this year to the Lustre 2.5. This is between Lustre 2.4 and 2.5 on the master branch. A total of 471 commits, and you can see kind of the layout of which organizations contributed which number of patches there. In terms of lines of code, here's another bar chart, shows you that. Of course, lines of code, these things are always a little wishy-washy about what exactly they mean. You can have a one-line patch that takes 2 months of effort to develop, and you can have another patch that touches 10,000 lines of code because it just reorganizes the code, and it only took an hour to work on. So it's not entirely a great evaluation of what's going on, but it has the advantage of, rather than being subjective, it's objective and very easy to put up on a slide. Here's a slide we probably haven't seen before. I get the question a lot, how big is the software development community in Lustre? And again, this doesn't completely answer the question because not every developer out there currently working on something had a commit in this version of Lustre. But I think it's probably a large percentage of the developers working on Lustre did have commits. So in all, we had 70 unique developers in the Lustre 2.5 release. If you add up the bars here, they do count total a little over 70 because we had some people change organizations and I wanted all the organizations to be represented. If you compare Lustre 2.5 to other versions, you can see it wasn't nearly as many commits as 2.4, which I think is a good thing, helps us handle the amount of change and stabilize the release a little bit more. Over time, you can see there's been a big bump in developers from the pre-2.4 days to now. We've reached another plateau, and I imagine there's some developers out there getting spun up still and haven't quite gotten in commits yet, so that'll grow a little bit more. But I think that's a pretty good idea of how big the Lustre developer community is right now. Now looking at the number of commits per developer, you can see there's a big amount of change. And like I said before, it's not really fully representative of the productivity of any individual developer because some commits are easier to develop than others. And I wouldn't be surprised if that big bar was James Simmons on there. He has a lot of patches and a lot of code movement there, a lot of good work. Lustre 2.6 is going to be the next release. That's coming up soon. We already had the feature freeze, and if you're not familiar with the terminology, feature freeze is when we stop landing big new features to the branch, and we start working instead on bugs and stabilization of the branch. So minor features, mostly bug fixes, can still go in until the code freeze date. That's going to be on April 30th this year, and we're currently targeting a Lustre release of 2.6 on May 31st. Another thing we do each year, we've done this 3 years now, is the Lustre survey. We're going to have that up on it's already up on the Lustre, the wiki in OpenSFS. We take a survey, try to figure out what versions of Lustre the community is using, what OSs they're running on, get an idea of what people are doing with Lustre so that can guide us in our decisions that we're making for the new releases. This year we had 76 people. That's a little more than last year, not quite as many as 2012, but that's a pretty good response. you guys responding to a survey, it helps us a lot. It helps really feed and inform our decisions. One of the nice things that we saw this time around is that there's been a strong uptake in Lustre version 2.4. Like I said, still a lot of people using Lustre 2.1, Lustre 2.8. There's even at least one guy out there still running Lustre 1.6, which surprises me, but hey, if it's still working for you, that's great. So going forward, Lustre 2.6, some of the features you're going to see there, we're going to continue working on the LFS-CK improvements. We're going to have MDT OST consistency in the next release. Stripe directories, so this is kind of a preview of, if you heard about D&E, we've been talking about this a lot in previous years. That's distributed namespace that adds the ability to be able to use multiple metadata servers, multiple MDTs. That is really targeted for full completion in Lustre 2.7, but since that's such a large feature, trying to land it all at once in one big pile isn't very feasible. So it's landing in pieces. Parts of functionality have actually landed for Lustre 2.6. So we have the ability to have stripe directories right now. And in 2.7, so in 2.5 we had the ability to have multiple MDTs, but each directory had to be on a different MDT. With 2.6, a single directory can be striped. The code's currently very synchronous, so I'm not sure what the performance is going to be, but it's great to get a preview there. In 2.7, they add all this asynchronous components that should get us the performance improvements we needed for parallel striped MDT. In 2.7, Lustre LFS-CK gets further improvements. We're going to get the MDT to MDT consistency. From Indiana University, the UID mapping, a bunch of us looking forward to that. A new one from Intel in 2.7, dynamic LNet config. A lot of, if you're familiar with LNet, the networking layer within Lustre, there's a lot of configuration that has to be done once at the time when you instantiate the module, when you load the module. A lot of it's through module options. The dynamic LNet configuration will make it possible to change a lot of things that you can't right now while it's already running. And hopefully through much nicer command line tools than we currently have. So that'll be nice. And as I already mentioned, the asynchronous distributed updates, the completion of D&E 2 and Lustre 2.7, that's something a lot of us are looking forward to. In 2.8, we've got quotas for projects coming up. DDN working on that one. So the ability to add the concept of a directory that's a project and quota based on that project rather than just individual developers or users or groups. Endpoint-only checksums from Oak Ridge. The idea there is that right now, if you're using LNet routers, for instance, in an LNet network, those LNet routers have to do a lot of checksumming, and that's not entirely necessary. You could just have the endpoints, the sender and the receiver at the very end of the endpoints doing that work. Offloads a lot of the CPU usage on the LNet routers. Layout enhancements, that's a feature that's more of a groundwork item. So that'll lay the groundwork for things like RAID 1 in the future. And I think we'll get a talk from John Hammond later on in this meeting that'll talk about some of the things that enables. And then finally, shared key from Indiana University. If you need more information, we've got some information about the CDWG up on the OpenSFS wiki. The community survey, there's a number of more items in there. If you want more details, that's up now. Everyone can look at that on the wiki as well. And a link there to 2.6. So if anyone has any questions, I'm willing to take them now.
If there's a feature that somebody really wants, is willing to pay for it, what is the right avenue, or who is the best avenue to contract with to guarantee that it makes it?
Well, that's a good question. I think the Community Development Working Group is a great place to start. at the very least, we can get you in touch with a lot of the people doing software development so that you can know who to contact, start that discussion. We can definitely get you started there. You can certainly hear from the people. There's a lot of representatives from different development organizations that can tell you what they're capable of doing and probably go offline, have a discussion about how exactly what they can do for you. And then come back to us and we can work with them to figure out what release the feature would actually wind up in the future. Anything else?
In the survey results, you mentioned a lot of sites that moved to Lustre 2.4. Do you have any data? In the survey results, you mentioned a lot of sites that moved to Lustre 2.4. Do you have any data that shows whether or not those were actual fresh installs or how many people have moved old file systems, perhaps preserving data in the process?
I don't think we entirely know that information, no. Do you have more information on that?
No, I don't.
Oh, different question? Sorry. All right, I don't think we know how the difference between how many did a fresh install of 2.4 and how many did upgrades. I know Livermore did an upgrade. We've been upgrading from 1.8 to 2.1 to 2.4. I think we even had one file system that we did from 1.6. And there are some pain points there. It's a little easier to start with the fresh OS, but a fresh Lustre install, but we made it work.
So, follow-on question to the same question. Do you have any information on how many of those were test beds and how many of those were production installs?
I believe it was mostly production installs. I think that was the focus, at least, of the question. Yeah, Peter clarifies the question explicitly said production installs, so hopefully that is what people answered.
I was going to say it might be useful in the future to get a sense of scale for each of the installs, terabytes or users or something.
Okay, he was suggesting maybe next time it's helpful to get an idea of scale, how many users or how many servers you're using, and maybe next time we will. So far, Peter's been doing the bulk of the work for us on this, and we're using a free survey system. But maybe next time we'll pick up the bill on OpenSFS and have a little more detail, be able to do more questions. Of course, there's always a balance there. If you do more than 10 questions, how many people are going to keep going through the survey? You start losing people if you make it too long. So you have to have a balance between detail and brevity there. Anyone else have anything? All right, looks like we're done then. Turn it back over to Steve.